They booked rooms with sea views, king-size beds, and welcome treats. But they forgot about me. Or maybe they didn't forget. My name is Isadora. I'm 29 years old. I work as a freelance editor. And despite my love of literature, I've never been able to write a single line involving my own family. Maybe because certain stories still hurt too much to tell. Or maybe because, until now, I didn't know the ending myself. The trip was supposed to be a milestone, my father's 60th birthday, celebrated with a family getaway to a resort on the coast of South Carolina. All together like old times, my mother repeated several times in the group messages. I wanted to believe it. I really did. But as soon as I arrived at the hotel lobby, carrying my suitcase with carefully folded clothes and a bottle of wine I knew he loved, I noticed the first sign that something was wrong. There were 4 names confirmed on the reservation. 4 rooms, 4 people. I was the 5th. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to process it. The receptionist smiled uncomfortably. Maybe there was a mistake, he suggested, and I wanted so badly to believe it. I sent a message to my sister Lara. She saw it. She didn't reply. Then I tried my mom. We're having dinner at the hotel restaurant. Come quickly. Just like that. No. My God, Isa, let's sort this out now. No commotion, no urgency. I ended up sitting on a wooden bench near the reception desk, the smell of lemon from the damp towels in the air, while the world slowly spun around me. It was as if I had walked into a movie in which my own family had decided that I would be an extra, or not even that. It didn't take long for it to sink in. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And there, alone with my suitcase at my feet and a bitter taste in my mouth, I understood that that night would change everything, but I still had no idea how. Before all that, before the hotel lobby and the deliberate absence, there was a time when I truly believed I belonged. That even though I was the quietest, the most introspective, the one who read books during Sunday barbecues, I was still a daughter like the others. I am the youngest of 3 sisters. Lara, the oldest, was born to be adored, always the most charismatic, the most praised, the most visible. Then came Bianca, who followed in her older sister's footsteps with almost military efficiency, a good student, elegant, reliable. And then there was me, Isadora, the artistic soul, as my grandmother used to say with that half smile I never knew how to decipher. The difference in treatment started early, but it was subtle. If Lara got a new dress, I inherited the old one. If Bianca had a school presentation, the whole family went to watch. Did I perform? You can show us the video later, sweetie. It wasn't aggressive, it was just how things worked. Even so, I tried. I attended family gatherings. I listened to childhood stories that, for some reason, never included me. I laughed at jokes I didn't understand. I've always been good at adapting, at filling spaces with silence. And deep down, I nurtured the childish hope that one day someone would see who I really was. Things got worse after I decided not to follow the expected script. I graduated with a degree in literature, chose to work remotely, and didn't get married in my 20s. That was enough to make my presence at dinners and holidays almost optional. Are you really going to make a living as a freelancer? Why don't you try something more stable, like your sister? Are you still living in that little apartment? The questions came like varnished hooks of concern, but they always left marks. My mother is the kind of woman who measures affection based on tangible achievements. A law degree is worth more than a published book. A marriage to an engineer is more talked about than a healthy relationship with someone simple. Maybe that's why she never understood why I didn't fit in. The trip to the resort, they said, was to reconnect. A gift from Dad, who, despite being more neutral, always let Mom take the lead in relationships. He was the one who called me a few days before the trip, trying to convince me. It'll be good for everyone, Isa. You've been so distant. Distant. That word hurt. Not because it was a lie, but because it was a diagnosis without a history. I was distant, yes, but not by choice. It was a distance that grew inside me with every averted glance, every disguised non-invitation, every silence in the family group. Even so, I went. Because deep down, I still hoped to be seen. Because there was still a part of me that believed that maybe, just maybe, it was their turn to reach out. I didn't know that I was about to learn, in the hardest way possible, that not every gesture of goodwill is recognized. Perhaps the cruelest thing about family exclusion is the subtle way it manifests itself. It's not a slap in the face. It's one less plate at the table. A look that pierces you as if you were glass. A whispered comment that ends in muffled laughter as soon as you enter the room. That first night at the resort, after realizing that my name wasn't on the reservation, I almost left. I grabbed my phone, opened the ticket app, looked at bus schedules and even flight prices. But something stopped me. Maybe pride, maybe anger, Maybe a primitive desire to prove myself, even if only to myself. We could share a room, right? I suggested at dinner, sitting discreetly next to Bianca. She smiled, clutching the menu as if protecting herself from me. Oh, Isa, everything's already set up. We each have our own space. Did you try talking to the front desk again? I nodded silently, even though I knew the front desk had already made it clear. The hotel was fully booked. No extra beds, no empty couches, nothing. Didn't you say you like adventure? Take advantage and stay at one of those alternative inns? It'll be a cool story to tell later, added Lara as she sipped her glass of white wine. I smiled. The kind of smile you give when everything inside you wants to scream. I swallowed hard. That night, I slept in a hostel 20 minutes away, in a shared room with metal bunk beds and a noisy fan. As I listened to the sounds of strangers snoring, I mentally reviewed all the times something similar had happened, all the little scenes that, together, formed a pattern. Like the Christmas when I was given a generic box of chocolates while Lara got an emerald necklace, or when I forgot my blazer at my mom's house and didn't remember until 3 months later. No one even bothered to tell me. Or how I once suggested a destination for a family trip and received only a cool Isa, followed by collective silence and the final destination being somewhere else, chosen by anyone but me. Even in the family chat group, which I thought had a bug for a long time, my comments rarely received a response. But if Bianca or Lara posted something, it was a flood of emojis and compliments. The next morning, I decided to have breakfast at the resort, even though I knew it would be uncomfortable territory. As I approached the table where they were sitting, I noticed the brief moment when the laughter stopped. That quick, uncomfortable silence, as if I were a typo in a beautiful paragraph. "Oh, Isadora, I thought you were having breakfast at the hostel," my mother commented, wrinkling her nose. I was, but it was closed. Gee, you should have told us. Told them? About what? About my own existence? And that's when I realized the exclusion wasn't about forgetfulness. It was about choice. It was convenient for them that I was on the sidelines. I wasn't a welcome presence, but rather tolerated, as long as I didn't disturb the harmony of the group. I tried to join the conversation. I talked about an author I had recently discovered, about an essay I was editing. But they didn't ask any more questions. They didn't delve any deeper. They changed the subject. And little by little, I faded away from the table, even though I was still sitting there. That's what devaluation does. It turns you into the backdrop of your own story. And no one notices that you're bleeding inside, because they've learned not to look. On the morning of the second day, I went to the resort reception once again, just to confirm. No rooms had become available. No last-minute cancellations. I walked back to the hostel under a cruel sun, the same sun that seemed to brown my sister's skin by the pool as I crossed the dusty street with my sandal coming off the side. On the way, I thought, how did I let us get here? The answer hurt because it was simple. Because for years, silently, I had given up pieces of myself to continue belonging. I didn't realize it at the time, but my family had always controlled the spaces in which I could exist. Sometimes it came in the form of veiled suggestion. Isa, don't wear that dark lipstick. It makes your face look so closed. Are you going out in that outfit? I think it's going to clash at the party. Why don't you try a job that makes your father more proud? It was advice disguised as care, subtly shaping my appearance, my steps, my silences, to the point that I started to censor myself before they even did. I gave up social invitations, ideas at dinner parties, even trivial details like the books I carried, all to fit into the invisible mold they expected of me. The mold of the discreet sister who doesn't compete, who doesn't bother anyone, who always gives in. And the cruelest part? I thought this was love. At that resort, the whole thing reached another level. My physical displacement, sleeping far away, eating alone, having to negotiate my presence on every outing, became symbolic of what had been happening emotionally for years. On the third day, they planned a visit to a charming winery in the area. When I asked if there was room in the rental car, my mother replied with a brief gesture. Oh, Isa, I don't know if there's room. Maybe if Bianca goes in the middle, I can rent a separate car and meet you there. But then we won't all be together, right? Said Lara, with a little smile that seemed to want to embarrass me for suggesting it. All together, I thought. How ironic. At the winery, I followed them in silence, laughing discreetly at the comments they made to each other. I've always been good at being a spectator. But at that moment, I realized that there was a huge difference between observing by choice and observing by exclusion. When I tried to take a group photo, my mother said, "Take a picture of just the four of us first, then we'll take one with you." They didn't. That night, I sat on the porch of the hostel and stared out at the dark sea. And it was there, between the sound of the waves and the hum of an old fan, that something inside me began to break. I started writing in the notepad on my phone, something I always do when I need to let my feelings out. But what came out wasn't an outburst. It was an inventory, a catalog of all the times I reduced myself to fit in, that I silenced myself to please others, that I disappeared so as not to bother anyone. I realized it wasn't just about that weekend. It was about all the years before it. It was about how my voice was diluted among the louder voices, and how that made me believe that being invisible was safer than being rejected. That night, alone, without the comfort of a private room or the warmth of a familiar gesture, I began to suspect an uncomfortable truth. Maybe I never belonged. And worse, maybe deep down I let it be that way. On the 4th day of the trip, I woke up with pain in my body. It wasn't physical pain, but it spread like fog, behind my eyes, inside my chest, deep in my throat. Staying in a room shared with 3 strangers who came home drunk in the early hours of the morning and left before sunrise was exhausting enough on its own. But what really consumed me was the pain of not belonging. I looked at my phone. No messages, no good morning, no how are you? Just the family group with a photo of Bianca by the pool, with everyone commenting with compliments. The kind of scene that only reinforced my feeling of being in the wrong place, or rather, of being nowhere. I tried to get up, shake off the day, act with dignity. I got ready carefully, as if wearing something nice would be enough to remind me that I still had value. A light dress, small earrings, light lipstick, nothing that would draw too much attention, but enough to not feel invisible to myself. I returned to the resort and found everyone gathered for breakfast. When they saw me, no one seemed surprised. It was as if I were just another detail in the room, like the background music or an empty cup. The guy at the buffet said they're out of pancakes, said Bianca, as if that were the most pressing issue of the morning. I sat down and took a piece of toast. I ate slowly, my mouth dry. Everyone at the table was talking at once. Conversations about investments, about Lara's new apartment, about my mom's garden renovation. No questions for me. No window open to my present. Until Dad, in a rare moment of attention, turned to me. Are you still living in that neighborhood? What's it called again? The neighborhood where I live. The same one where he helped me look for an apartment 6 years ago. Where he took me personally to meet the real estate agent. Where we had coffee at that little bakery on the corner, and he told me he was proud of me for pursuing my independence. He had forgotten. It's Brookline, I replied, trying to hide my disappointment. Oh, Brookline. Right. Well, I hope everything's safe there. And then he went back to talking about something else, as if my existence ended at that geographical point. There, in front of them all, with my name almost forgotten, my history erased, something inside me gave way. I had to excuse myself. I left the table with trembling hands, like a teenager rejected in front of the school. I went to the bathroom in the lobby, and for the first time in years, I cried in public. It wasn't loud, dramatic crying. It was silent, restrained, like everything I had always been. But it was crying that pierced me. The feeling was that I was falling apart, as if all my attempts to fit in, to be kind, to be present, had disintegrated in the face of the coldness of those who should have known me better than anyone else. I stood there for almost half an hour. I mentally replayed every gesture of that trip, every absence disguised as carelessness, every silence in the form of indifference. And more than that, I felt an overwhelming emptiness, because for the first time, I couldn't convince myself that there was still hope. I was breaking down, and when a part of you starts to break, it drags memories, promises, and even the image you have of yourself with it. I spent years believing that if I tried harder, was kinder, more understanding, more invisible, they would accept me. But that trip showed me that it was never in my control. That night, I didn't go back to the hostel. I wandered aimlessly until I found a coffee shop that was still open. I ordered a black coffee and sat in the back, between bookshelves and the sound of instrumental jazz. For the first time, I gave myself permission to think about myself, far from the expectation of being the ideal daughter, the sister who understands everything, the woman who swallows her pain to keep the peace. And there, between bitter sips and painful thoughts, I felt something new being born, a deep desire to stop molding myself to fit in, a timid but growing desire to stop asking for space and start creating my own. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I felt with every part of my body that I couldn't go on being the same after that night. The 5th night arrived with an overcast sky and the air heavier than on previous days. Maybe it was an omen, or maybe it was just the world reflecting what was going on inside me. I arrived at the resort determined to spend little time there. I just wanted to attend the celebration dinner they had planned for my dad, the official reason for the trip. It was the last night, and it promised to be a special event, with speeches, toasts, photos, and tears of emotion. I entered the hall with restrained steps. I was wearing a dress I had bought weeks earlier, just for this occasion. Navy blue, discreet but elegant. I applied a little more makeup to my eyes. I wanted to feel dignified, at least on the outside, and for a brief moment, I deluded myself into thinking that things could be different that night, until I saw the photo mural projected on the big screen. 60 years of an inspiring life, read the caption, followed by a sequence of images from my father's childhood, his youth, his marriage to my mother, the birth of my sisters, and then a succession of photos with Lara and Bianca at different stages of their lives, graduations, trips, parties, smiles. My image? None. Zero. Not a single photo of me with him, not even one with the family. As if my story had never crossed his in 6 decades of life. As if I had never existed for that man who once rocked me when I had a fever, who taught me to ride a bike, who swore he would always be there for me. I trembled. I looked around to see if anyone noticed. Bianca was smiling, Lara was clapping, Mom was wiping her eyes, Dad was laughing with a glass of sparkling wine in his hand. And me? I turned into a statue of flesh and shame, a body that was present but didn't occupy any space. When the speeches began, I shrunk into my chair. Mom spoke proudly of her daughters and thanked everyone for coming together as a family. Bianca honored her father with rehearsed words. Lara made everyone laugh with stories from our childhood. No one mentioned my name. It was like watching a play where I was cast as an extra, even though the script was also about me. After the speeches, everyone stood up for a toast. I stood up too, as if by reflex. And when I raised my glass, Dad finally looked at me, for the first time that night, and he said, "Oh, Isadora, you came. I'm so glad you could make it." I could make it. Those words stabbed me like knives. My heart raced. My face burned. "I've been here since the beginning," I replied, in a low but firm tone. He frowned as if trying to remember. Of course. You're staying somewhere else, right? I guess. We haven't seen you much." It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement. Disinterest. And it was there, in that brief and disastrous dialogue, that everything inside me broke. I took a deep breath. The room seemed to spin, but I knew that if I didn't do something right then and there, I would spend the rest of my life regretting yet another instance of invisibility. I tapped my glass gently against the table, excused myself, no one reacted, and walked out of the room, leaving behind the lights, the laughter, the applause, leaving behind the charade of a union that never included me. I sat down on a wooden bench in the resort garden. The wind was cooler, and there was a smell of rain. For the first time, I didn't cry, because there were no more tears, just a devastating calm, like the silence after an explosion. There, alone, I faced the hardest truth of my life. My family didn't see me, and maybe they never would, no matter how hard I tried, no matter the dress, the smile, the sacrifices. Nothing would change that. That's where the decision was born. It would no longer be about them. It would be about me, about reclaiming my voice, my presence, my dignity, about rebuilding something from the shards, not to prove anything to them, but to prove to myself that I still existed, that I had always existed, and that I deserved much more than scraps of affection. I returned to the hostel for the last time that night. The atmosphere was the same, stuffy, noisy, with the thin mattress creaking at the slightest movement. But I was no longer the same person who had arrived there 5 days earlier, with hopeful eyes and a vulnerable heart. Something in me had changed, not in a loud or dramatic way, but with the serenity of someone who, upon reaching rock bottom, finally finds solid ground to push off from and start climbing. I opened my suitcase. I took out each piece of clothing and folded it again, not out of necessity, but for symbolic reasons. I was organizing myself on the inside while reorganizing on the outside. It wasn't an escape. It was the end. I decided I wouldn't attend the last breakfast or the final family photo. I would leave before without fanfare. No goodbyes. I had already said goodbye to all of them inside, to the image I had built over the years, to the role I had forced myself to play, to the wait for recognition that only corroded me. The next morning, while they were still sleeping in the comfort of their rooms overlooking the sea, I boarded a bus back home. With every mile I traveled, something inside me was reconfiguring itself, not with anger, but with lucidity. A painful but liberating clarity. During the hours of travel, I read excerpts from the diary I kept on my cell phone. Excerpts that I had started as outbursts, but which I now read with the eyes of someone who is beginning to understand her own story as an author, not as a victim. And I started writing a new text, one that may one day become a book, an essay about invisible ties, about families born of blood but who do not know love, and about what it really means to belong to oneself. At home, I called a friend, the only person who always listened to me without trying to shape who I was. I invited her for coffee. I told her about the trip. For the first time, I shared everything. No embellishments, no minimization, no trying to understand everyone's side. I spoke my truth, and she just listened. She cried with me. Then she laughed. Then she held my hand. You're not invisible, Isa. They were just looking somewhere else. The problem was never you. I started filling my days with small reconstructions. I cooked my favorite food with love, organized my books in emotional order, not alphabetical, and hung a handwritten phrase on the mirror. I see myself. I validate myself. I exist. I started turning down invitations that drained me. I started going out with people who made me laugh for real. I started saying no without guilt. And little by little, I felt my soul return to its place, like a picture that had been crooked for years and suddenly aligned itself with the right wall. I also enrolled in an autobiographical writing course, not to exercise trauma, but to give voice to what had been screaming inside me in silence for so long. Throughout the classes, I understood that telling your own story is an act of courage, because it forces us to look at the shadows with our eyes wide open. And that's how I began to prepare for the most difficult, but also most necessary moment, to face my family with peace in my heart, not to seek approval, but to end the cycle of submission. I didn't know when or how, but I knew that day would come, and when it did, I would no longer be the same woman who swallowed frogs at Sunday dinners. I would be someone who had tasted the bitter taste of rejection and yet chose to be kind to herself. Someone who, after years of trying to fit into a space that was never hers, finally decided to build her own home within herself. 2 weeks after the trip, I received an invitation to a reconciliation lunch at my parents' house. It was a Saturday. The message came from my mother with a shallow explanation, to catch up, followed by a heart emoji. It was so casual that it seemed to mock what had happened. I took a deep breath. There was a part of me that wanted to erase everything, let it go back to the old uncomfortable comfort zone. But I knew that if I accepted that invitation as if nothing had happened, I would be betraying myself again. So I accepted, but not to pretend. I accepted to finally be seen, by them and by myself. I arrived a few minutes before the appointed time, not because I wanted to be punctual, but because I felt I needed that moment alone with the house. The creaking gate, the smell of tomato sauce coming from the kitchen, the rug embroidered with the family name. Every element seemed to test me, to ask me, "Are you sure you want to do this?" I was. I was greeted with automatic kisses and mechanical comments. "You're so thin. Are you still with that boyfriend? Did you bring your cornmeal cookies?" I smiled slightly, but inside, I was firm, like a root that had finally found good soil. During lunch, the conversation revolved around Bianca's renovations, Lara's new courses, Mom's recipes. Nothing about me, nothing about the trip, nothing about what they knew, because they knew, they had done. Until, at the end of dessert, Dad commented, "That dinner at the resort was so nice, wasn't it? Too bad you didn't show up much, Isa. We missed you." They missed me? I almost laughed, but it wasn't time for irony. It was time for truth. "Do you really think I was absent, Dad?" I asked, looking straight at him. He hesitated. Everyone at the table stopped chewing. "Well, you stayed somewhere else, right? You stayed more on your own. Because you left me out of the reservation. Because no one cared where I was sleeping. Because for days I was treated like an accident." Silence. My mother tried to intervene, with that conciliatory tone she always used to sweep everything under the rug. "Honey, we didn't mean any harm. It was just confusion." "No, Mom. It was a choice. And the worst part is that it wasn't the first time. Your whole life, you chose where I could fit in, how I could exist, what I could say, how I should dress, work, love, and when I didn't follow the script, you pushed me aside, as if I had excluded myself. But it wasn't me. It was you." Bianca looked away. Lara frowned as if she didn't understand what was happening, but I continued. "I didn't come here to fight. I came to say that I'm tired. Tired of begging for space, of accepting crumbs, of trying to please while losing myself. And I'm not saying this to cause pain. I'm saying this because, for the first time, I chose myself." My father looked bewildered. For the first time, I saw his eyes really looking at me, as if he were recognizing that I actually existed, that there was life behind my soft voice. Mom dropped her dessert spoon on the plate, making a loud noise. "Do you think we're against you?" she asked, in a more fragile tone than I expected. "I think you don't see me. and that's as painful as being against me. I got up from the table, calm. I love you, but love doesn't mean accepting being hurt over and over again. I'm willing to rebuild something, if there's sincerity, but I'm not going back to being an extra. Either you see me for who I am, or you learn to live with my absence. There was no immediate response, and I didn't expect one. Those words weren't seeds for others. They were roots for me. I left there with a light heart. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt whole, and above all, true. After that lunch, there was silence. For days, weeks, no one wrote to me. No calls, no attempts to get back in touch. And for the first time, that silence didn't hurt. It freed me. Because it was the kind of emptiness that comes after a necessary cut. An emptiness that no longer scared me, because in its place was something I had never had before. Clarity. I went back to living my life with presence, with purpose. I started writing more consistently, without censorship. I entered a literary contest with a piece called The Room They Never Reserved. It was a metaphor, of course, about all the spaces I was invited to be in, but never belonged to. The piece went viral. It was shared, read on podcasts, and transformed into voice by other women who recognized themselves in it. I received messages from strangers thanking me for putting into words something they had experienced for years and never knew how to name. For the first time, I realized that my pain, when brought to light, was no longer just mine. It began to heal. Sometime later, my mother sent me a letter, handwritten. The handwriting was shaky, with blue ink and small smudges from corrections. She didn't apologize directly, but she said, I reread some old messages, some photos, and realized that maybe I erased you without even realizing it. If you want, we can try looking at that album together and see what was left out. I didn't respond right away, not out of hurt, but because I learned that healing also takes time. It wasn't about forgiving. I had already done that. It was about deciding what was worth rebuilding, and how. My dad also reached out to me. He asked me to meet him for coffee. This time, he listened. He didn't defend himself. He didn't try to put things into perspective. He just listened. And in the end, he said, I didn't know I was losing you while trying to keep everyone close. Now I understand that sometimes keeping peace with everyone is exactly what makes us lose the ones who matter most. It was a start. My relationship with my family is still a work in progress. But the difference now is that I am at the center of my own life, not on the sidelines. I make a point of taking my place, of saying when it hurts, of stepping back when I need to, and of staying when I am truly seen. The most transformative thing, however, was finding myself, discovering that I don't need others to recognize me in order to exist. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see more than a familiar face. I see a whole woman, rebuilt. A woman who once slept in other people's rooms, but who today is building a home within herself, with space, with a voice, with light. If you've made it this far, perhaps you've experienced something similar. Maybe you were the invisible daughter, the silent brother, the tolerated presence in environments that called themselves family. If so, know this. You deserve a room, a name on the reservation, a chair at the table. But above all, you deserve the right to get up and leave where you are not seen, because true love never requires you to disappear to fit in. Today, I see myself, and that, in the end, changed everything.